Let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Lindstrom. I'm with the Rocky Mountain IES chapter, and both we here in Denver and everybody and Eric and the chapter over in Salt Lake are pleased to present today Mr. Jim Benya, who will be giving a really interesting discussion. As a brief introduction, I'd be remiss if I did not do this. Jim is, one of the legendary figures in the lighting business here in the United States, with winner of over 200 national and international design awards. He's personally completed 15 LEED Platinum projects, including 3 net zero energy buildings, as well as, and he's also a winner of 4 international environmental design awards. He's also been involved with over 50 LEED Platinum, Gold, and Silver projects. He has over 40 years of experience in architectural lighting design, author of 2 books, Lighting Design Basics and Retrofit and Relighting. He is also a member of the IDA, International Dark Sky, board member, sorry, of the International Dark Sky Association, and the chair of the U.S. Model Lighting Ordinance. He's a fellow of the ILD and a veteran of over 51 presentations at Light Fair. We are really pleased to have him today presenting to us, and look forward to hearing what he has to say. So Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Andrew. And I want to say a warm welcome to IES members and friends in Denver and Salt Lake. My heart goes out to you in Colorado for reasons we all know, and what's happened lately. I'm sorry, very sorry to hear these things, and my thoughts are with you. Want to say a special hello to friends, colleagues, graduates of the University of Colorado, one of the great lighting programs in the world, graduates who have done phenomenal things. And you might see at the bottom of the slide, in 2013, the IES Michigan created the Lighting Hall of Fame. And the first 3 inductees were Squillace, David DeLaura, some of you may know, and yours truly. So it's pretty much an interesting group, and very honored to be part of that group of people. This guy, Squillace, was the mentor and a renowned mentor in the lighting industry, and he started his career 70 years ago, perhaps, and he was at the leading edge of lighting in North America, working as an electrical engineer in Detroit. Great inspiration to many of us, a great leader to many of us. One of the things that we did is, of course, we had to tease him about his Italian background from time to time, because after all, back in the 70s when we were all getting started, the Godfather movies were very popular, and it just gave us fodder for teasing. And Steve took it all very well, and he was just absolutely funny as heck. But the best thing about Steve that I loved the most was his forthright honesty. That Steve put it out there right up front, everything he did and everything he said. And he told you why. He told you the truth, and he told you what he thought. And that boss, we called him the boss as a result, has been a lifelong inspiration to me. And hopefully I can share a little bit of the type of, not just the type of material he would talk about, but the passion for doing lighting well, right, scientifically, creatively, in all respects. And also, probably most importantly of all, being a participating, really active member in IES. He was president of the IES while I worked for him. He was always active in some IES work, committee, board, something. He put his heart and soul into IES. And I'm indebted to him in so many ways. And one way I can pay him back is by talking like him and about him. Yet by your gracious patience, I will a round, unvarnished tale deliver. And so the key idea here is that I'm not going to pull any punches. I promise not to be political, because there's way too much of that these days. But there's a few things that really have got to be said, and I think you need to understand what's really going on if you're not aware. Some of you are. I know a few of you, and I think you know that we are in a time in the professions and in humanity where, because of social media and other reasons, there's an awful lot of controversy. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of politically tinged information that affects us all. And there's some politics and lighting that many of you may not know about. I'm going to expose a few of them to give you some thought for what you think we as an industry might want to do about them. But no matter how you look at it, the lighting industry is a wonderful industry that is embraced. And one of the things I like about it recently came up because of women in the professions the last couple of weeks, is lighting was one of the great industries to really break down a lot of those barriers. I've seen women take lead of some marvelous activities in lighting. And so to our industry, there's a lot of good things to be said for all of us, and I hope we continue. One of my favorite things, that somebody dropped this on me 30, 40 years ago, that this guy, Eric Hoffer, is a writer, a guy who wrote, he was a longshoreman, but he wrote, I wouldn't say elegantly, but powerfully. And one of my favorite phrases, and this is a little slight misquote, but it's the one you hear all the time now. Every cause begins with a movement, becomes a business, and eventually degenerates into a racket. And this, I've thought about it for many years, but recently I've seen some real trends going in what I would consider to be the wrong direction. And I'm going to point those out to you from my point of view. We can debate some of them. Some are pretty obvious, though. So to Eric Hoffer and the tempo of our time, remember, movement becomes a business and eventually degenerates into a racket is one of the issues. And I'm going to start off with energy. This is a curve that I published in LDNA magazine in May 2018. What I set out to prove and to show was what we've accomplished as an industry since the start of the energy era in lighting, which would have been roughly around 1979, when Title 20, it was actually before that, but Title 24 was the first statewide code enforced in energy efficiency in new buildings, which started in 1979. And what I tried to do was track what I believe was a code complying building, minimally code complying building, how its lighting power density and how its controls impact together affected relative lighting energy use compared to a building barely complying with the very first energy code. This curve, it took me a while to put this together because I based it on the various energy code editions of Title 24, using that as my foundation. Those of you who know a lot about energy codes know that Title 24 generally leads, 90.1 follows, and then IECC follows those. It's changed a little bit, but that's kind of been the history. So Title 24 is a good reference point of view, and I know it really well because I've been involved with the codes in California for most of this time. What we see, frankly, is we've gotten to the point where combining the controls impact and the relative lighting power densities, what we see is we're now using a new building built to code in 2021, 2022, is probably using less than 10% of the lighting energy that would have been used by that same building in 1979. That's an enormous success, and our industry deserves more than a pat on the back. We've gone from being 40% of the use of energy in a building, or more in some cases, to practically less. We're now down in the 5 to 7% range, 10% maybe of a building. That's phenomenal. What if every other end use of energy had done that? But they haven't. And so, meanwhile, we continue to have the triannual changes of the big three, and the lighting energy code changes every 3 years, even though there's not much left to say. One of the reasons, of course, I consider this as becoming a racket is you have to buy these books or the downloads of them. And they start getting a little expensive every 3 years. There's a whole business based on producing the education, the documentation, and everything else. So we're getting close to a racket here. And we're talking about this in California. We finally reorganized the IES to create a California legislative committee where we're questioning the California Energy Commission about, haven't we done enough? Aren't we there now? And start questioning the cost effectiveness of the code changes that are being promoted every 3 years. And we're going through it right now for 2022. And some of the code proposals they're obviously trying just to change the code, to either benefit the utilities or benefit somebody else. And I think I'm not real happy about it. See, what's left to save? How do we save 20% of 6%? Well, we can, I suppose, if we try real hard, but if we save 20% of 6%, what are we really saving? We're saving 1%, but we're going to spend millions of dollars changing the codes and changing the literature and everything else. Is it cost effective? In California, by law, it's supposed to be cost effective. Is it? Probably not anymore. Does it have impact? Does it change the state's energy meter? Probably not anymore. So it really deserves to be questioned whether energy savings are the issue anymore in lighting. And the answer if you ask yourself that question, you say, we are doing a pretty good job. Maybe we've gotten there. Why doesn't everybody else get there? See, this is the other thing. The energy code has spawned new UL standards, the ANSI standards for all kinds of different stuff, IES recommended practices, technical memorandum, the National Electrical Code, which you got to buy every 3 years too, by the way, for $105. Design Lights Consortium, LEED, all of these things mostly spawned, in part at least, in case of IES publications, but all of this is spawned largely from energy efficiency and energy standards. Look at the UL standards, look at what those cost. I've had to buy a couple of those for some of the expert work I do lately. $700, $900 to buy a UL standard so you can, refer to it, have it on your desk to read. People have asked me, what do I think about DLC? Well, DLC, I've supported the idea of DLC for a long time. And one of the reasons is that DLC is the only technical resource that I have to confirm the quality of products quickly. If it's listed on the DLC qualified products list, I know that somebody has checked to make sure the UL listings are correct, that everything is done correctly. And it's then been verified. DLC realizes it has that advantage, but also DLC realizes it was created to do that because the utility companies didn't want to do it themselves while they're handing out rebates. So DLC is an organization that I think very well of, but I think it's going to have to change because its useful purpose to me is different than why it was created. LEED and WELL, as far as I'm concerned, they've already reached the racket level of our professional practice. Not that they didn't do good. I think WELL is well is a copy of LEED in so many ways, but LEED really changed the way we look at designing buildings, and it deserves a mountain of credit for having done that. And it deserves a mountain of credit for having changed the way we interact and we practice. But it's now kind of degenerating into a racket because we learned all those things. In California, our building codes embrace a lot of the best stuff in LEED. And with lighting having so little use of energy anymore, we've done our job for LEED. Now, we have a lot to learn about designing buildings for humans, and light and health and all that stuff is certainly big time material these days. And WELL is certainly trying to fill that gap, partly by educating and teaching us just like LEED did and other things. But the question is, do we need these independent, non-code, voluntary standards to get us there? And so that's one of the lessons I hope we can learn is, are they necessary, like LEED and WELL, to move us from where we've been to where we need to go? Or is there another vehicle for doing that? Real good question. I don't have the answer. Like I say, they're helping us a lot, but have they become money-making businesses that happen to help us a little bit? That's one of the questions. This one really bothers me. This just came out. On the 9th of March, the American Institute of Architects is taking on the International Code Council, because the International Code Council, which produces the International Energy Conservation Code, has decided to eliminate public input in the code development. That's what we would call lack of transparency. Robert Ivy, the president and fellow of the AIA and president, says this heavily opposed decision stands only to serve select special interest groups and will no doubt erode progress towards the modern codes that are desperately needed to heal our planet. I'll put it in my words. What I have seen, because I've served on several ASHRAE committees, particularly Standard 90, I've seen basically a degeneration of the committee membership in particular. When I was active in 90.1, the code panel composition was made up reasonably evenly of people from industry, people from research, people from academia, and professionals. I then served on Standard 189, which is the ASHRAE Committee for Sustainability, about 11 years later, and I found that the committee was stocked with manufacturers. There were very few professional practitioners. I was one of maybe 10, 15% of the committee were professional practitioners. The rest were manufacturers and industry representatives. What they learned was that by writing the codes a particular way, they could ensure that their industry and their products were more or less required by code. That's what's happening to our codes and standards. And what the AIA is saying these days about the ICC and its impact on IECC means that we are facing this now. I've seen it firsthand here in Title 24 land, and I really think we need to be concerned about that. In other words, the energy codes, in my opinion, from a lighting standpoint, have now become a racket. And I think we need to totally question whether they need to be changed and whether the process of developing needs to be more transparent. I say they do. Along the same lines, we're seeing a lot of information and misinformation these days about all kinds of cool, potentially technologies. The Internet of Things, power over Ethernet, network lighting controls, etc. What's happened, in my opinion, is the tech industry has to grow. And they have to grow exponentially, it seems. Having been a lighting designer in San Francisco in the early days of the tech industry, continuing really to these days, you just see it getting bigger and bigger. And the companies build, frankly, look at the Apple headquarters, spectacular facilities. dream jobs for lighting designers, let me tell you. So you look at all this and you say, well, we've got to grow. And so they have invested heavily into the lighting industry because they've run out of cell phones and other things that they completely invented. And now they're trying to push it into. The PoE systems, the original ones, were put in by companies making PoE equipment for computers. And they had excess, they had power supplies and stuff lying around, said, hey, we can power lighting with this. And so they found ways to move it into the lighting field. I think we're seeing a lot of information about how we're expected to understand and consider the possibilities of integrating all this into lighting. What's going to pay for it? What's actually going to make all this work? Well, I can tell you, I'm a big fan of DC power. I think DC power, particularly for lighting at some point, is probably our future. I've even said publicly, I think by 2030, a lot of lighting systems are going to be class 2 low voltage DC. Maybe a little bit like the slide on the right, not like the one on the left. The one on the left is sort of dreamland about how the IoT might work. But the one on the right is kind of practical. I don't think it's going to look like this because power over Ethernet uses Cat6 cable, which is extremely small wires, and there's a lot of power loss in it. I don't think that's the architecture, but it's going to be close. We are going to move in that direction. The larger question is, if there's not much energy left to be saved, how much are we willing to spend on sophisticated lighting controls that can save not much? This is a question that deserves to be asked more than it's being asked right now. I think there's going to be a compromise somewhere in the middle. We're going to learn things about how to design buildings better. But just rushing to a conclusion about the Internet of Things is the way we're going to do it, I think we need to be a little bit more cautious than we're hearing from a lot of the people promoting these ideas today. I'd rather change the discussion to grid citizenship and grid citizenry, because we're going to go from AC to DC. We're already doing it. The photo at right is from a residence that I'm working on right now. It's not a cheap residence, but because these Tesla power walls cost about 7,500 bucks each. And it's a pretty big investment. But when you start looking at, you put up a photovoltaic array, like in the lower left-hand corner, you can store that energy. You can go for days without full sun and never really use any power from the grid. But from a practical matter, when you start thinking of California has a population of over 40 million people, not everybody's going to have Tesla power walls today, tomorrow, or even in 2030. So we have to start looking at how we take the grid and evolve it. So it's the other thing I have found about photovoltaics is they generate a lot of electricity. If we can store it, all of a sudden, a lot of our problems about having enough energy that's renewable and clean are going to go away. They're going to be minimized by a lot of things, whether it's hydrogen, whatever it happens to be. Certainly using wind and other technologies. All of this stuff is going to push us towards a grid that has DC and AC integration that's going to be necessary for us to do this. So I have to start thinking about this ahead as lighting people, as electrical engineers even more. As an electrical engineer, I can tell you that the challenges of moving from an AC to DC isn't so easy. A lot of people say, oh, no problem, no problem. Baloney. There's a lot of problems doing it. I have done projects that are completely DC, and it's not easy. The equipment doesn't exist, or there's not many choices. It's expensive. It's hard to do. And DC at high voltage is very dangerous compared to AC. From a circuit interruption protection alone. So there's a lot we have to think about. I see a day, I'll talk about this a little bit later, which is vertical farming indoors. you start saying, well, why would you want to build an indoor farm in California where we have plenty of sunshine and all that? The secret is not sunshine. The secret is water. And indoor farming uses less water. We have all the sunshine we need. We can generate all the electricity we need to power all the LEDs we need, but we need to reduce the impact of insects and all kinds of stuff out there. We need to keep the environment cleaner, and we need to use less water. That's why this whole integration, this whole evolution is going to happen to make all that possible. Shifting gears, I want to talk about dark skies a little bit. We are, as a society, guilty of irresponsible outdoor lighting. No one would know more about this, I don't think, than my dear friend Nancy Clanton. Nancy was one of the first people to, even though I always had an inkling there was something out there, she really introduced me to the International Dark Sky Association, and I ultimately became a member of the board of directors and an officer of IDA for a while. I'm no longer in those positions, but it was I was on the board for 14 years. We do irresponsible outdoor lighting, and we do it because we do it. If we look at the Twin Towers of Light, no single icon of America has had more impact on more people, more powerful impact than this demonstration. And yet, between 2008 and 2016, they tracked and they found it killed 1.1 million birds were attracted to the light shafts. They swirl around it until they fall to their deaths. 1.1 million birds. It also uses 616 kilowatts when it's running, which operated only a small amount of time is 271,000 kilowatt hours per year. At 20 cents per kilowatt hour, what's that up to? It's a lot of money. So even these expressions that we think are great, wonderful lighting expressions, we have to ask a question: is it responsible? Look at the lower photograph, sea turtles. They're considered among the world's most imperiled wildlife. 6 of the 7 species are at risk of extinction. And yet, this is typical beach lighting, in a beach community. And this is responsible for a lot of that. Tourism and light pollution seem to go hand in hand. We've got to learn to do better, and we've got to regulate it somehow. Here's a very interesting couple of photographs. I got involved in 2 studies for the US Army. One of them at Fort Campbell in Kentucky, and one here in the Seattle area at the Joint Base McChord-Lewis. And my job was to help them assess what they could do about light pollution in the area. This night satellite photograph of Seattle shows you how extensive the light pollution is in metropolitan areas. The one on the right is a Black Hawk helicopter that I spent a night on, riding around assessing light pollution using military grade light goggles, night vision equipment. And the picture in the middle is what it looks like through those night vision gears when you're trying to say, now let's train people to work in the desert, in the natural dark and everything else. How do we do that? Because the growth of light pollution is everywhere. And it's very hard to find dark places near our well-established military bases to do that kind of training. They've had to cut back. They even talked about cutting it out and moving all the training somewhere else. What does that do to the financial wherewithal of the community that they're going to remove an entire military base from? Pretty significant, not to mention a big waste of money. What if we could just control light pollution? That was the question we were asked. And unfortunately, we came back and said, are you really serious about this? Because you can do it, but it's going to take some real work to control light pollution through any type of regulation, because people don't think of it. They don't care about it. They don't even, it doesn't even cross their minds too often. A lot of light pollution, of course, is caused by the short wavelengths. I did this study because, people were walking around saying, well, the moon is 4,000 K, so 4,000 K LEDs are natural. So I did it. I took out my spectrometer, and I have a spectrometer. I have 3 of them actually, and shot the moonlight, which is a photo on the left, or the SPD on the left, and then the one on the right is an LED that was being promoted as the same as moonlight. As you can see, they're vastly different. And the real problem, of course, is the blue pump of the LED engine. In the two to the right, the 2 spectral power densities, you look at the one on the top, and that is a 5,000 K and a 2,700 K. Immediately, you should realize that, sure, lower color temperatures do minimize blue. That's good. More of the energy is moved out of the blue and into the longer wavelengths, especially around 630 nanometers. But so there's an advantage. But what if we didn't want blue? Because blue is also the most photobiologically active. Not only blue, but cyan. Because it isn't just blue. We now know that the human impacts on human health and wellness tend to occur in the cyan range around 485, 490 nanometers. Now, they're minimized with LED luminaires, but they're still there. What if we filtered out everything under 500 nanometers? So I've worked on a couple of projects with colleagues where we've actually applied filters to LEDs to get rid of all the short wavelengths. The filter looks yellow. Obviously, if you want to get rid of blue, you use the color wheel opposite. And this is what the spectral power distributions of these are. And as you can see, the 2700K, which is peaking right around 590 nanometers, which is real awful close to the peak of sodium lights. And the blue one, the higher color temperatures, peaking real close to 550 nanometers, 555, which is the peak of human photopic sensitivity. You come to realize, interesting things happen here, don't they? Are these practical ideas? They've actually been installed on the Big Island, Hawaii, with some success. The drawback, they look yellowish or yellow-green. And maybe that isn't so pleasant, but from an environmental perspective, it is certainly one step forward. But I'm going to tell you that light at night has impacts. What are we going to do to change the way we look at things? Just about everybody, including IES now, is saying, let's get rid of anything over 3,000 K with exceptions. I think for sports lighting is an acceptable exception. But for most other applications, even 3,000 K has got way too much short wavelength light. Here in Davis, we pioneered using 2,700 K. We did that 7 years ago. We put in 2,700 K throughout the city in residential areas. And it really makes a nice difference. But in the communities we're working with today, we're having a bigger conversation. I'm advising our clients to start looking at 2,200 K for residential neighborhoods. In addition to minimizing the blue and cyan impacts on people and wildlife and everything else, the color is actually pretty darn nice. At 2,200 K, when you're color adapted, looks absolutely wonderful on people. 1,900 K starts to look pretty darn yellow-red, but it still is sort of a white light source as well. But you also have the choices of PC amber and even narrow band amber. PC amber is surprisingly good. It's got a CRI in the 60s, but it has almost no blue radiation, no cyan radiation. So it's giving you good visibility, but minimum impact upon the environment. Narrow band amber is preferred by astronomers. Its big problem, low efficacy. So we got some work to do there. But what I'm telling all my clients for street lighting, outdoor lighting, is we're going low color temperature for many good reasons. And I see a future where we will be doing this pretty much sooner or later everywhere. Because the cause of the 2020s, at least one of our causes, remember the cause starts the movement. The cause of is dark skies. Finally, we're getting our arms around the importance of this. The city on the right is from the Middle East. I can't remember which city it was, but they had a citywide power outage. Somebody took this amazing photograph of what it looks like with no electricity. The one on the left is Southern California, and this is what it looks like with electricity. I think it's Southern California, I'm not sure, but it doesn't really matter. We lose a lot, and we may be losing more than we think biologically. Doing things very carefully means not putting light onto, the area near where you are. If you have to have some, confine it, make it as little as you can, and reduce the color temperature. This was all done by Ella Mills, who's a lighting designer in Portland. She used to work for me. She's very talented, a wonderful gal. But she was very careful in designing this bridge at William, what's the name of it? It's a college. I've even worked there, but I'm having a brain thing, so we'll skip that. The human-centric lighting. Oh, there is a phrase I hate, because if the slides before don't tell you, all of that was human-centric lighting, and what good did it do? The other thing is this solar exhibit doesn't occur in the world. It doesn't occur because if you're far enough north that the sun never sets, its maximum vertical rise during the summer or during the course of the day is not that limited. It's more dramatic. This is just a cool photo, and it's not very realistic. The color of the sunlight, by the way, everybody says, oh, the setting sun is 2000 K or whatever, that very yellow. Point your spectrometer the other direction. You'll get a whole different thing, because a large portion of our light here on the planet is created by the sun on a clear day, but it's not on a cloudy day. And even on a clear day, still about 25% of the light we have is not the color of the sunlight. It's blue. So what we have to do is we start to have to realize, turn your head and you're exposed to entirely different color, temperature, and intensity. These things aren't talked about when people talk about this so-called human-centric lighting. I want to see better science. I'm very concerned about it. One of the sciences I'm very concerned is what I call the Valley of Cyan. If you look if you look at these three power densities on the right-hand side, you can see all of them, actually the peak, it's peaking fairly well, right around 480, 490, give or take, the dotted blue line. None of these is a standard LED. The one at the top is a violet pump, Sora, okay? So you can see the valley of blue that it creates, because 415 nanometers is the peak of the engine. The other two are blue pumps. But what's happened to the cyan? There's no valley there. These are two different light sources. One of them is called sun-like. The other one is a close relative. It's made by BIOS for treatment. What all three of these engines are doing is they're pumping up, whether intentionally or just because of the science, they're pumping up the cyan region. Why is the cyan region important? That's where the impacts upon the human systems are most prevalent. And with the valley of cyan from most LEDs, the melanopic peak, if you look at the one on the left, 480 nanometers, give or take, is the melanopic peak, right? That's the latest findings. So if you have cyan light around 480, then you're pumping towards the melanopic benefits. But melanopic lux aren't necessarily correctly related to this right now. So we have got a lot to learn. Both IES and CIE are working hard on this. But we still got a lot to learn before we have any prescriptions for health, wellness, and lighting. If someone is promoting that idea, there's a few really responsible, very knowledgeable folks out there. But what they'll tell you is that if you have a very specific condition and really good technical advice, you can do a really good job. But to just put color changing in lights, especially with lights that have the valley of cyan, to create the so-called melanopic benefit, nah, it's not where we're not quite right yet. We got a lot of work to do to get all the melanopic system worked out. So I'm a little concerned that we're putting the cart before the horse, selling healthy lighting before we know what it is. Oh, and then there's UV. My goodness, nothing like COVID to bring out all the snake oil in the world. Go ahead, buy this $43 UV germicidal lamp. Yeah, put it in your living room, turn it on, look at it for a while. And when your singed eyeballs are done, then we can talk about why this is dangerous. Now, there's places where we're going to use various spectra. I talked earlier about vertical farming. By controlling the spectrum, the water, and many other things, and keeping ultimately a very clean environment, we can probably grow food better and just as efficiently. We can generate all the energy we need to power these lights by building the farms in the Central Valley of California. But we're going to use a small percentage of the water right now that we're wasting by the millions of gallons, because it evaporates, and it won't evaporate at that rate in these environments. So I think vertical farming, and I don't care what you're growing, I think it has, if you look at all the elements of the equation, you come to realize that doing it differently is probably going to be a key to the future of life on this planet. Shifting gears again, I want to talk a little bit about credentialing. We have fought the battle of credentialing in the lighting industry. I wrote my first article about this in Architectural Lighting magazine in I think it was 1991. And it was, should lighting designers be licensed? Boy, did I get a pile of mail on that one. Everybody got really revved up about that. The IALD funded the development of the LC process. I served as the first test committee chairman. I served on the committee that put all of that stuff together for a number of years. To reach LC is an important accomplishment. But the industry didn't embrace it. And you got to ask the question, why didn't we embrace something that just asks you to have a basic knowledge of lighting in the largest, most general sense? We've gone to the process of the IALD has created the Certified Lighting Designer. I think that is a certain amount of merit. That's a credential worth shooting for. But it's really designed for independent lighting designers. It's really not designed for contractors, distributors, agents, all the other people in the industry. It's really designed for IALD members to say, this person is particularly qualified. I happen to be a professional engineer. To me, that has been a more valuable credential because I can sign Title 24 calculations. I can do a lot of things other people can't. So That's probably been very valuable to me compared to some of the other options. Being a member of IES, I think, is something we all should do. As a credential, it's mildly meaningful. I think once you achieve recognition in IES, it starts to become more and more relevant. But what I find relevant about being an IES member is it gives me an instant introduction to all the other IES members in the nation and many of them in the world. We have the best IES in the world. The Brits are pretty good too. The French are pretty interesting. The Germans are Germans, very interesting group. But you know, our IES is pretty darn good, and I treasure my membership, and I'm pleased to be a part of it. IALD, I'm also a member, a fellow, and I look to the IALD, but that's an organization for independent lighting designers. It's not an organization for anybody else. So it only covers a narrow swath of our industry. I think it's an important credential to become a professional member or higher. I think it's an important credential if you're a lighting designer. For the rest of the industry, it's something to be respected, but it may not be for you. Lead accredited professional, I think, is something a lot of us thought we had to get. I didn't. I think it's losing its luster now that lead has become so commonplace. It was a big deal like 15, 20 years ago. Being a member of a theater group like USITT, I think, is valuable if you're in that field. In other words, credentials, you have to pick them for their benefit to you. I really wish more people were doing LC. I really do, because it was designed to be the catch-all credential. And I'm disappointed that we only have about 5,000 people that are LC right now. And I may be wrong on that number. I haven't looked it up in a while. But choosing one, I think, is important for anybody. Choosing nothing is also an option. I don't expect the sales representatives calling me to necessarily have a credential. I prefer they be LC, so that proves to me that they know, they passed the test that shows they know something about lighting. But I'm on record as having said we should have a credential, and LC is probably the one. So if I had to put forth one, I'd say LC, but keeping in mind that some of these others can take its place, and you have to decide for yourself how you want to sell yourself. But I think you should have a credential. Field equipment and skills. If you're going to be a really knowledgeable lighting person and work in the field, here are some tools you might want to think about having. Having a luminance meter. They now are available pretty practically with remote reading or extensions so that you can do that. I need to buy a new one, frankly. I have an older one with an extension cable, and it's a pain to use. I think I need to get one of the new Bluetooth ones. A luminance meter or a knit gun. If you're going to do any outdoor lighting work in particular, and a lot of indoor lighting work, it's really good. Also, if you do HDR photography, knit guns allow you to calibrate your images so that you can say how many knits using false color diagrams are at every point. What does a knit mean is a much larger question, because I think a lot of people don't think enough about adaptation and its role in what a knit means. That's a really critical question that we've got to do some more work on in the science of illumination. But I have a luminance meter, and it's come in handy, and I use it for doing forensic work, where I have to take measurements of accident scenes or signs or other things that are part of our world today. Camera and software suitable for high-res and HDR imagery. Learning HDR imagery was a lot of fun. And having the camera and software to do that, I think, will enable you to take, well, frankly, you want to see some really stunning pictures? Take a look at Jan Lennox Moyer's books on landscape lighting, particularly the third edition. with George taking pictures for her. Jan's nighttime images have stunning dynamic range, much better than you could take with just your cell phone. You can take an HDR photo with your cell phone, but you're going to have to use software, because what it does is it combines a number of images of different exposures to essentially allow you to see darker darks and lighter lights. It's pretty magical. You got to have a spectrometer these days. You just got to have one. Bluetooth spectrometer is what I use. I also have a handheld integrated spectrometer. I use them for different reasons, different places. I find them both handy. Flicker meter, I have a flicker meter built into my Bluetooth spectrometer. Thermal imaging device, I've used this to look for hot spots. You know, LEDs don't like to get too hot. And when you think you're having a problem and you touch that luminaire and it burns your fingers a little bit, you may want to take a look and figure out what temperature it's at, because I've worked on several cases and an expert doing forensic work, again, trying to figure out why something failed, and being able to measure the hotspot, the temperature, using something without having to use a thermocouple and actually touch it has proven to be very valuable. Thermal recording devices. I use little thermal things that I can stick in places and let them run for a couple days and then come back and recover the device and then find out what temperatures things got. I discovered the cause of a failure of 2,000 LED 2x2 luminaires in a library, because I put the thermal measurement devices in, and I found in more than 25% of the luminaires, the constant temperature of the luminaire during the course of a typical day was about 20 degrees C hotter than the rating on the driver. And that was the cause. And that was a failure of the manufacturer, and it was a pretty expensive replacement that they had to do. Have recent calibration certificates for your devices. So if you're called on to do something of a forensic nature, calibration, what I tell lawyers is, I said, the first thing we're going to ask that other expert is, can you show me the calibration certificates of the equipment you use? If they don't even know what it is, they're dead meat. Then, of course, the other thing is lighting is no longer about us, as in the US or Canada. Lighting is about the whole world now. This spectacular project designed by some colleagues in the UK this won the IALD Radiance Award, probably the premier lighting design award in the world, designed by Spears and Major. This spectacular project tells us that it's no longer, it's no longer limited. Well, everybody kind of knows that now, but I just wanted to make the point that the world now appreciates good lighting design. And I wish I could get a project like that. It's, wow, what a stunning project. Another change of direction here. I want to talk a little bit about our ethics these days. I've said a number of things here where I'm sort of suggesting that people are not necessarily making ethical comments and decisions, or at least promoting ethical ideas. I'm concerned about how we're changing as a society. Our tolerance for misinformation seems to be going up, not down. And a lot of people are selling things that maybe aren't that well tested or that well thought out, or an appropriate application for something. I see, and people aren't doing enough homework sometimes. I'm absolutely furious when I see a 4,000K or 5,000K street light. What an idiot to do that. Why would you do that? Haven't you been paying attention to the American Medical Association, which is saying 3,000K tops? The IES is now saying, yeah, that's about right. Anybody who tells you you can see better under 4,000 or 5,000 isn't telling you science. They're telling you their impression. There's no science that really backs that up in situ, which means in the real world. Oh yeah, go in the laboratory. You might be able to get a better result. But in the real world, no. Why? Because the eye is not static. It's dynamic. It changes. And the way your brain processes the information is dynamic and powerful. And to say just from a picture, you can make these decisions, I don't think that's true. So I think we've got some work to do here in being forthright and questioning a lot of the promoting of products and ideas we're getting today. The health and light field makes me furious at times. People are selling color changing lights because they can sell color changing lights. Thank goodness they're not saying as much about being a health benefit as being simply changing, white light so to meet your mood or your application. And I'm not 100% sold on it. I'm not 100% unsold on it. It's a design decision. And to me, design decisions need to start with an ethical consideration of what are your degrees of freedom? Should you be promoting healthy light everywhere all the time? I don't think so. I think, there is one really healthy light system that I like to use a lot. It's called daylight. And I think becoming better daylighting lighting designers, something we all ought to do. But short of that, you're stepping into an area where the science is not, there's no prescriptions. The day the CIE and the IES come out with prescriptions for how to do health and light exactly this way under exactly these conditions, we're moving in the right direction. We are not there yet. And I'll be darned if I'm going to just say, sure, we ought to do this. I've seen some of the worst lighting I have seen in my career has been motivated by people trying to sell health and light in the last 15 years. So that is probably the one thing, along with dark skies, that we have to change, become more critical of where the information is coming from and why would we want to do something. And if we're satisfied we've done everything right, move ahead. But make sure you're really satisfied and not just proceeding because something's popular. See, there was a reason why snake oil has developed the bad name that it has, because people were making things without the science to back them up and selling them because, well, they could sell. And the US Food and Drug Administration was created because of snake oil and other awful remedies that were being offered at the early part of the 20th century. So, do we really want to invite the Food and Drug Administration into the lighting industry? I don't like it personally, but we're asking for it if we continue to promote health and light the way we are right now. We need to give our academic institutions more money and more time to do the research, to come up with the prescriptions so that we can proceed then as a profession. Right now, it's the Wild West, and it makes me very nervous. There are a few good companies that I listen to very carefully, but there's a lot that I disregard. I'm not a color temperature tuning guy necessarily, although I've done it for clients, because the science is not there that supports doing this scientifically. I think there are places, though, that you can do it. And if you've done your homework well, like, for example, in nursing homes, I think there's a lot of potential in doing certain places in certain situations well, with color temperature tuning and with light level tuning, other things that we should be doing. I agree. but it's emergent. Use that word emergent to realize that that's where we are in the health and light thing. And sorry, I don't mean to go back and forth on slides. That was an accident using Zoom here. What I do want to say is we have an institution to mitigate the problems of misinformation and crass commercial overreach. That's us. We need to talk about these things. We need to call them like Scolacci would always do. I remember him getting up at one IES section meeting after a guy had given a completely crass commercial presentation. Scolacci was all of about 5'5", 5'6". And this guy was probably about 6 feet tall. Scolacci walked up to him. He had the big, thick glasses because he had eyesight problems. And one of the great ironies of his life was he had macular degeneration and he went pretty much blind by the age of 80. He lived to be 92. But Steve, and he was with it throughout the entirety of his life. But he dealt with these disabilities. But Steve walked up to him. This is before he was too blind. And he looked up at the guy and he said, I won't spell it out, BS. But he said it spelled out to the microphone. And the guy looked at him, and Scolacci grabbed the microphone and he proceeded to lecture the entire audience on what the guy should have said, what he was trying to say, what his point was, and why he was being, crass. And the guy walked out after about 2 minutes. He realized he was in deep kimchi. And it's my fondest memory of Steve, other than he also was a great Italian tenor. And he broke out in a cappella song in front of the entire IES when he was sworn in as president. Great moment. So, IES, we need to work together, talk together, meet together, do things like we're doing today as often as we can, participate, please. When we can have the annual conferences again, go to the annual conferences, participate online, be part of the IES, support it. The IES is open to everybody. That's the best part. We don't kick anybody out hardly, because whether you're selling products, making products, designing buildings, you're a part of IES. And our standards, participate in committees if you have the time and the knowledge. Many of you, especially the graduates of these great programs like Colorado, Penn State, and others, you have a real advantage. Contribute to our industry through the IES. This is the way we're going to be better. This is the way we're going to do better. And this is the way we're going to have the type of reputation that we need to maintain. My final comment is going to be, we, the IES, have changed a lot in the last decade. We've gone through literally a revolution in our leadership, a whole generational change. And I think it's largely been for the better. We have outstanding people now working for IES in headquarters that expand our capabilities. Take advantage of that. Participate and take advantage of what our headquarters now can do for all of us. I think you'll find that it's been a real pleasure for me to work with our new leadership on our standards, participate in standards committees if you have that skill and knowledge. But I think IES is doing great, and I hope you feel the same way. We'll try to answer a few questions on the Zoom system now. If you send a question, you have a question personally, you want to send it to me, there's my email address. And of course, I will try and answer a few questions here while we have a few minutes.
All right.
Feel free. So
All right.
With that, take it away.
All right, Jim. I just want to say thank you. That's a great visual of the tenor breaking into song as he is sworn into his presidency with the IES. That's really kind of cool. Thanks for sharing that.
There were a lot of people in that room. It was probably, I don't know, 500-600 people in that room, and no problem.
Cool. All right. Well, let's see here. The first question I have is from Carl, and Carl would like to ask, regarding responsible outdoor lighting, what are current strategies for addressing existing irresponsible outdoor lighting? Are these strategies effective? What would be the most effective strategy, whether they're just in practice or just a theory at this point?
Shotgun. No, you shouldn't do that. No, the principles that I use, first of all, fully shielded light. Seldom will I use a luminaire where you can see the glow, like in a classic globe type luminaire you might use in a downtown situation or something. I try to limit those applications and situations. Globe lights, very carefully, very, very carefully. But fully shielded light, then you move on. Excuse me, to other consideration. Reduce the color temperature. We have 2700K here in Davis. We're using 2700K in our green belt. And I think it's a little bit too white. I think our green belt should be 2200K. When people say, oh, you can't see under 2200K. Really? So for the last 50 years under high pressure sodium, you couldn't see? That's not true. You can see pretty darn, and you actually can see better because 2200K, you can get it at 90 CRI if you want to. And colors, become not only well rendered, but maybe significant. So drop the color temperature, get down, baby. 2200K, put it in post stops in the downtown environment. And don't do your street lighting any higher than 3000, and preferably you do the overhead street lighting if you're mixing and matching there at no more than 2700. We've done experiments and mock-ups in whole communities where we've gone to, we've tried everything in different communities here in Southern California. And I keep coming back to, it looked really good. 2200K looked really good, and 2700K looked really good too. And 3000 is a little bit too white for me. So that's the second thing I do. Third thing is only put in the amount of light you really need. Most streets are overlighted, by a lot. Read RP8 very carefully because you can reduce the street light. A friend of mine, Chris Monrad, is a really great electrical engineer, lighting designer in Tucson, relighted Tucson with LED lighting, replacing high pressure sodium. And, he did some calculations and determined that, golly, we could do, we can reduce the power by like 60, well, no, it was 50%. We could reduce the power by 50%. Then he came to realize that after he put in all the lights, the whole city had been lighted to RP8 at high pedestrian conflict or pedestrian activity level. Well, the city doesn't have high conflict or pedestrian activity level. It has low. So they were able to cut the light levels of all the streets in half, which you can do with LEDs because they're dimmable. So I cut them all in half. He saved another like 25% of the energy. He's running at 70% less than the original energy. When you do that, you amortize the cost of the lighting system much faster, which is a big part of the reason why cities scramble to get the money together to replace the lighting. They want to save some money and they want to pay for it out of energy savings. If you do, we did that here in Davis. We were the first ones where we said, replace the 4000K streetlights you insisted upon putting in, replace them with 2700 and cut the wattage in half. And they did. And guess what? Everybody's pretty happy with it. And the additional energy savings are paying for the cost it was to change out the lights they put in wrong in the first place. So a lot of opportunities there. I could go on and on. Go ahead with the next question.
Okay. The next one is from Henrik Clausen, and he says, "Hi, Jim. Do you think your considerations are global or only applicable for the US, or I would guess North America?"
I'd say they're mostly universal. I forgot to say one other thing about dark skies.
Uh-huh.
Turn off the lights and dim them in the middle of the night or after activity hours. There's a lot of communities you can, installations you can dim after 9 or 10 p.m. and reduce the light pollution even more. So dimming, less light, and full shielding and color. Okay. Henrik, nice to hear from you, buddy. We've met a number of times. Mostly we meet each other in Europe, although he's been here too in California. We've seen him as well. Good friend.
We have a global footprint here at the Denver and Salt Lake IES webinar series. So good to see people from all over the place.
Well, Henrik and I have had many a conversation about lighting, but I'm going to say that what I'm talking about can be probably spoken in many different languages, but it all means about the same thing. We all have to do this. I mean, this is one planet. We're all on it, and I'm concerned. I think we should have. I went to the very first Earth Day meeting in Ann Arbor in 1970 when I was a college student. I went to the very first, and I have been an Earth Day person concerned about what's going on ever since. And it makes me sad to know that we could have done something then, but we didn't. And we still didn't much. We got a lot of work to do. We got to do it real fast because in addition, in those years since I was in college, we've also doubled the population of the planet, which was not a real good idea either. Mm-hmm. So we got work to do. So yes, universal. I'm going to say that.
Okay. The next one is from Ken Garner. He said there was a move away from high pressure sodium using small target visibility, largely comparing HPS to metal halide. What are your thoughts on safety of highway and roadways?
I talk regularly to Ron Gibbons and to other scientists, particularly Alan Lewis, who does a lot of the visibility measurements with Ron at the highway traffic safety test bed they have at Virginia Tech. I talk to him fairly regularly. Alan and I actually do expert work together sometimes. So he's a closer friend through IES, of course. Alan has said point blank, he said, in a laboratory, we can measure the difference in visibility of light sources. By the way, he published some papers dating back into the 1990s on visibility of light sources, under light sources, including low pressure sodium, high pressure sodium, everything that was in the market at that time. And Alan's told me two things that have stuck with me pretty significantly. He said, number one, in terms of color temperature, he said, in the laboratory, we can find differences, but he said, in situ measurements, we cannot find a statistically significant difference among the color temperatures you might ordinarily use for roadway lighting, from 2,700 up to 5,000. No statistically significant difference in visibility. So, small target visibility, I think it's important science, but when the people who know it really well and use it as part of their science tell you, well, it's nice in the laboratory, but not in situ, that's big number one for me. Big number two for me is we consulted with Alan a lot in trying to relight the city of Flagstaff, Arizona. Flagstaff, Arizona is a very dark city because it has two observatories in town. Flagstaff is at 7,200 feet elevation, and so they don't have mountains nearby tall enough to put observatories on top of. So they're right there in town. One of them is the U.S. Naval Observatory. Those guys are fanatics about controlling light pollution for good reason. However, they've relighted their city with low pressure sodium. And at low light levels, one of the problems they've encountered is that they have, unfortunately, 4 times the pedestrian fatality rate of the statewide average, because they have some relatively, how shall I put it, fast streets or highways, national highways going through the city. And it seems like in commercial districts, there's a lot of problems there. And we studied that. I finally said, Alan, you got to help me figure this one out. And he said, it's really simple. He said, below 1 nit, 1 candela per square meter, spectrum need really matters. You really do need a white light spectrum, a spread, spectrum with other than the narrow band light source, the low pressure sodium type. He said, but above 1 candela per square meter of background luminance, he said that advantage starts to go away. And he said, by the time you get up to 2 or 3 candelas per square meter of background luminance, a monochromatic source tends to provide comparable visibility as a polychromatic source. So I take those two together to mean that simple ideas like 5,000 K is better than 3,000 K are actually really there. That's partly due to the fact that a lot of the difference between 5,000 K and 3,000 K is blue light. And blue, as it turns out, has another impact upon the human system, which is that it causes a stress response. And so when you're struck with a glaring blue-white light, you get more stress response than you do with a glaring warm-toned light. And that stress response is what you're feeling. It's adrenaline, all right? So what's happening is you think it's brighter. The police are always saying, oh, 5,000 K, we can see better. No, you can't. What you're doing is you're feeling that it's brighter, which is making you think that it's brighter. But, for many years, Nancy Clanton designed a lot of prisons, outdoor lighting with high pressure sodium lighting. They could see, they could see just as well. And of course, sodium was a much better light source than metal halide. For a lot of reasons, it was not a bad choice. So I'm going to lay it out there. My personal question and answer learning experience from the scientists that I count on to do this are telling me it's not making much difference, and that we should follow the environmental side for better outcomes these days.
Okay, great. We have one more if that I think we still have time for. I know we're a little over, but I'll just throw it out there. From Jim Fry, he asks, what are your thoughts on linear FL, fluorescent, I guess, retrofits versus replacing fluorescent luminaires? Do you have recent examples of excellent or surprisingly poor outcomes?
Oh man, there is a tricky one. Thank you, Jim. Nice to hear from you. That's a tricky one because it's a moving target. It's a moving target because the technologies have changed so much. When I first started writing a lot about this, I was working for the Focus on Energy program in the state of Wisconsin. They were consulting with them and publishing things with them and teaching some classes out there. And in the early days, the efficacies of LEDs weren't quite good enough to compensate for some of their costs and problems associated with them. That's all over. Today, the efficacies, some of the technology used in LED fluorescent tubes really does, done properly, you can use any one of the 3 types of LED tubes and get a good result. The real question is the ballast. If you're gonna use, I think it's the type A, where you just plug it into the ballast and the ballast drives the LEDs. The tube is designed for that. That's probably the least efficient, but the easiest to do. The one in between, the type B, where you simply short out the sockets and you put 120 volts or 277 volts into the lamp itself and let the driver inside the lamp do the job. The second is sort of in the middle. And then the most efficacious is the one that uses a new driver. And so that's probably old news to most of you. From my standpoint, we haven't done a lot of that kind of work in the last 3 or 4 years. I was very involved in it for a while. So I don't have a strong feeling about what's better in today's market. But I think knowing the 3 choices and realizing that the type C requires getting in, removing the ballast and putting it in means you have to use at least a maintenance electrician. Whereas the type A, you use a maintenance person or, anybody can do it. So it's cost effectiveness. I don't know. I haven't done that calculation in a few years. That's where I'd look first.
Okay, great, thanks. The last, actually, it's not a typed in question, but we do have a hand raised from Drew at CEA. So Miranda, if you can unmute Drew, maybe he might want to ask a question.
He's muted.
He is now muted.
Yeah.
Unmute him.
Oh, do I have a question for you? Yeah, I have a
You're on
question
view.
for you. As I've been listening to all this dark sky, what, as I'm a young engineer starting, and what takeaways would you say would be the most important thing in focusing in lighting design? As learning from your mistakes so that I don't make the same mistakes going through, I know that's a lot of a question and stuff, but
Mistakes? Mistakes. I think if you follow the principles, okay, emit no light above 90 degrees. So that's what we would call more or less fully shielded, is the best first point. There's a lot of everyday lighting equipment. You take a floodlight and you up tilt it. Don't do that. You can find forward throw equipment and you're going to give up maybe a little bit of efficiency, but you eliminate the damage you do to the environment. So use fully shielded lighting, no emissions above 90 degrees. If you're going to emit lighting above 90 degrees, have a really good reason to do it. You want to light the flag, but shoot the light straight up, because light going straight up goes into space faster than if it goes through the atmosphere sideways. The worst light goes out sideways and it hits more atmosphere before it finally gets to space. And it's the Rayleigh scattering of the light hitting molecules in the atmosphere. And the density of the atmosphere is, of course, denser near the planet's surface. So straight up, it gets to space faster. If you have to do it, that's a way to light. That would be the issue number one. Issue number two, and by the way, you can do fully shielded sports lighting just as easily as you can do fully shielded parking lots or anything else. And I have seen spectacular sports lighting done with fully shielded equipment. It's mind-blowing because we're so used to glare all over the place. Color temperature, like I said earlier, get the color temperature down as low as it makes sense. Be aware of your context. There's no reason to have 5,000 K lights in a community of 3,000 K lighting. Be aware of your context. Dim the light to as little as you need. One of the things when we get involved with sports lighting, I'm telling the people commissioning the system, we're going to put in a switch where for varsity games, you can turn the football field up to 50-foot candles. But for anything else, it's 15-foot candles. We're saving energy, but we're also impacting the environment and the community a lot less. So dim the lights to only what you need and turn them off when you don't. So color, shielding, the right amount of light. Boy, if you just got those three things together, and contractors are going to say, well, I can VE this to this really cheap wall pack and save $20. Don't let them do it. Just don't let it happen. And sometimes, you got to lay down in front of the VE truck and you're going to get run over. I've got tire marks in my chest from lying down in front of the VE truck. You take a beating on that, but that gets back to ethics. Our ethic has got to change as an industry, and we've got to do the dark sky thing. So don't let them do it, and fight it. Fight it with, fight it from an environmental and human health perspective. Don't just say, no, I want to do it because I'm a lighting designer and I'm right. Play the environmental card, play the human health card. And frankly, we're working on a project right now where the environmental lighting consultants on the Coronado Bridge in San Diego and the lighting designers who are working on it are not very happy with us because we're limiting their spectrum and we're preventing them from spilling light onto the water. And it's hard to light a bridge, without spilling some light on the water, but it can be done. And we forced them to change their lighting design to be more responsible. And it's going to come out really, really good. And it's going to be something we can all be proud of. And it will be approved by the California Coastal Commission, which is the hardest environmental group to get through. So yeah, we got to do it. And fortunately, we do have some responsibility requirements in California that are not necessarily everybody has to deal with. Yes, we are a little bit more regulated in that regard. But I'm kind of proud. I am a pro bono consultant to the Coastal Commission from time to time. They call me up and they ask me, okay, help us with this one. We got to do these things. We are the IES. And I do this and I say, I'm representing the IES and lighting community by helping you. Do it. It's good for all of us.
Great. Well, thanks, Jim. That pretty much wraps up all of our questions and raised hands. I would personally just like to take the opportunity thank you for